On the island of Maui, there was once a grove of papaya trees that had simply given up. The leaves had gone yellow and thin. The fruit had stopped coming altogether. Down in the soil, a microscopic worm called the reniform nematode was feeding on the roots, draining the trees from below. By every normal measure, that grove was finished. The grower could have reached for a harsh chemical. Instead, a scientist named Susan Schenck, working at the Hawaii Agriculture Research Center, tried something that sounds almost too plain to take seriously. She ran a thin stream of watered-down molasses, the same dark syrup sitting in your baking cabinet right now, straight through the irrigation lines. 1 part molasses to 20 parts water once a week. Over the following weeks, the grove came back. New leaves, new growth, fruit on trees that had already been written off as dead. Now, you are going to hear plenty of people online tell that story and call it magic. I am going to do something different today. I am going to tell you what really happened down in that soil, because the truth turns out to be far more useful to you than any magic trick, and it will change the way you look at that bottle of molasses for the rest of your gardening life. Section 1. The Reframe. Molasses is not plant food. Here is the first thing you need to understand, and it is the thing almost every gardening video gets completely backwards. That molasses did not feed the papaya trees. Molasses is not plant food. It never was. What it fed was something else entirely. Something alive, something you cannot see with your eyes, and something that has been quietly running your garden the whole time you thought you were the one in charge. To understand the molasses trick, you have to meet them first. And once you do, you will know exactly when this works. When it is a plain waste of a good bottle of syrup, and how to use $1 of molasses better than most people use a $40 bag of fertilizer. So let me take you underground for a minute. Section 2. The Rhizosphere reveal. Reach down and pick up a single handful of healthy garden soil. In that one handful, there are more living creatures than there are people on the entire planet. Bacteria, fungi, tiny protozoa, all of them packed into the crumbs of dirt clinging to your plant's roots. For a long time, gardeners pictured soil as a kind of warehouse. The plant pulls nutrients out. You put nutrients back in with a bag of fertilizer, and that is the whole story. But more than 100 years ago, in 1904, a German scientist named Lorenz Hiltner noticed something odd. The soil pressed right up against a living root was not like ordinary soil at all. It was crowded with microscopic life, far more than the soil sitting just an inch away. He gave that thin, busy zone around the roots a name we still use today. He called it the Rhizosphere. And here is the part that stopped me in my tracks, the first time I truly understood it. Your plants are not simply sitting there sipping from the soil. They are feeding it. Up in their leaves, plants turn sunlight and air into sugar. You would expect them to keep every bit of that sugar for themselves, to grow taller and set more fruit. They do not. A grown plant takes a big share of the sugar it worked so hard to make, sends it all the way down to the roots, and leaks it out into the soil on purpose. How much, you ask? Careful studies of the rhizosphere have found that plants release somewhere between 20 and 40% of all the carbon they pull out of the air down into the ground around their roots. Up to 40%. Nearly half of everything the plant earns in a day spent underground. Why would any plant give away that much of its hard work? Because it is buying something. Those leaked sugars are wages. The plant is paying the microbes around its roots to work for it. Modern research teams, including one at the University of Bonn in Germany, have even used the same kind of imaging you would see in a hospital to watch a plant steer that sugar to exact spots along its roots, hiring its little workers right where it needs them most. And those workers earn their keep. They pry nutrients loose from soil particles and pass them straight to the root. They crowd out the organisms that cause disease. They build the soft, crumbly structure that lets water and air move down to where roots can breathe. The plant pays in sugar. The microbes pay back in food and protection. That partnership, not the bag of fertilizer, is what actually grows a healthy garden. So now look again at that bottle of Blackstrap molasses on the shelf. What is molasses really when you strip it down? It is sugar, a dark, mineral-rich sugar. And when you pour it into your soil, you are doing, by hand, the very same thing your plants have been doing through their roots since the beginning of time. You are paying the workforce. That is the whole secret, not a hidden cure the company's buried in a vault, not magic, just sugar, offered to the living things that were already doing the real work all along. Section 3. What Blackstrap is plus the real research now. Not just any sugar will do the job well, and this is where Blackstrap molasses in particular earns its place. When a sugar mill processes sugarcane, it boils the juice and spins out the sugar crystals, over and over again. The first boiling gives you light molasses, the mild kind people drizzle on pancakes. The second boiling gives you a darker molasses, and the third and final boiling leaves behind Blackstrap the thick, almost bitter syrup at the very bottom of the kettle, after nearly all the table sugar has been pulled out. The sugar industry long treated Blackstrap as a leftover, but what gets left behind is interesting. Sugarcane is a giant grass that can grow 15 to 20 feet tall, and it draws minerals up from deep in the ground. Boil away the sugar, and those minerals stay behind and concentrate. A single tablespoon of Blackstrap carries roughly 300 milligrams of potassium, around 40 milligrams of calcium, close to 50 milligrams of magnesium, plus iron, manganese, and a touch of copper. Now, I want to be straight with you here, because this is exactly where a lot of videos start to oversell. 1 tablespoon stirred into a whole gallon of water, then spread across a dozen plants, is not going to fertilize your garden with those minerals. The amount is simply too small to matter much. So please do not think of molasses as a mineral feed. That is not the job it is good at. Its real talent is something else. It is almost pure, fast, easy food for the life in your soil. Scientists even have a name for that. They call it a labile carbon source, which is a fancy way of saying a sugar that microbes can gulp down right now, with no waiting. And that is precisely why serious researchers keep reaching for it. Remember the papaya grove in Hawaii? Susan Schenck was never feeding the trees. She was feeding the soil microbes so generously that the whole balance underground tipped and the helpful organisms multiplied and crowded out the nematodes that had been draining the roots. And she is far from alone. At the United States Department of Agriculture's Research Laboratory in Fort Pierce, Florida, 2 scientists, Jason Hong and Aaron Roscoff, have spent years developing a method called anaerobic soil disinfestation. The name is a real mouthful, but the idea behind it is simple. They work Blackstrap molasses into the soil, cover it over, and let the microbes feast so hard that they burn through all the oxygen and create conditions that clear out soil diseases, weeds, and nematodes with no harsh fumigant chemicals at all. Researchers at Clemson University have tested the very same approach, and in every bit of that published work, molasses plays one role, and it is always the same role. It is the fuel. It is the food that wakes the soil up. So notice what not one of these scientists ever calls it. None of them calls molasses a fertilizer. They call it a carbon source. Hold on to that word, because it is the whole difference between using this trick well and pouring it down the drain. Section 4. The honest part. Most videos skip. So now let me tell you the part that most of these molasses videos quietly leave out, because it is the part that will actually save you from disappointment. Molasses does not always work. On a lot of gardens, frankly, it does almost nothing at all. And the folks who tried it once, saw no change, and decided the whole thing was nonsense were not wrong about what they saw. They were just missing one piece of the puzzle. Here is what happens when you pour molasses onto the wrong soil. The few microbes that are there wake up and gorge themselves. Their numbers shoot up fast, because soil bacteria can split and double in a matter of hours when the food is rich. But then the sugar runs out, the way sugar always does, and with nothing else to fall back on, that boom collapses into a crash. Most of those new microbes die off within a week or two, and you land right back where you started. This is not some fringe grumble, either. A careful study out of Ursinus College tested molasses at the same modest amounts a home gardener would really use, and found that, on its own, at those everyday rates, it did not meaningfully lift soil microbial activity or nutrient release compared to simply doing nothing. On its own, at normal amounts. That is an honest finding, and you deserve to hear it laid out plainly. So here is the way I want you to picture molasses from now on. If you remember nothing else from this whole video, remember this one line. Molasses is kindling. It is not the fire. If you have ever lit a wood stove, you already know this in your bones. A handful of dry kindling catches fast and burns bright. But if there are no logs sitting under it, that pretty little flame flares up and dies in under a minute, and the room stays cold. Kindling by itself is useless. Kindling laid on top of real wood gets the whole fire going. Your soil behaves the exact same way. The molasses is the kindling, that quick, bright burst of fuel. The logs are the slow, steady food already living in your soil. The compost, the mulch breaking down on top, the old roots and the decaying leaves, the organic matter. Pour molasses onto bare, dead, lifeless dirt, and you get a flash of nothing. Pour that very same molasses onto living soil that is already full of organic matter, and you wake the whole community up and keep it humming along. In healthy soil like that, those same researchers found a single feeding can keep the microbial activity raised for 4 to 5 weeks. That one idea, kindling needs wood beneath it, is the thing that separates the gardeners who swear by molasses from the ones who swear at it. Now, before I give you the exact recipe and the schedule, I have already put the whole thing together for you, so you do not have to scribble notes or rewind this video 3 times. There is a free 1-page printable blueprint for this entire molasses method. The recipe, the dilution, the timing, the soil prep, and the do-nots, all laid out on a single clean sheet you can tape up inside your garden shed. If you look at the corner of your screen right now, you will see a small, square code. Just open the camera on your phone, hold it over that square, and the printable will pop right open. Print it out, keep it next to your tools, and you will have the whole method in your hand the next time you are standing over a tired tomato plant, wondering what to do. It is my gift to you. No sign up and nothing to buy. Now, let me show you how to do this properly. Section 5. The practical how-to. The recipe itself could not be simpler. All the skill lives in the small details around it. Start with 1 tablespoon of Blackstrap molasses, not light molasses, not the fancy table kind, and definitely not corn syrup. The label has to say Blackstrap because that is the one carrying the dense food the microbes are hungry for. And here is some good news for your wallet. The cheap grocery store bottle works just as well as the expensive organic one, so there is no need to overspend. You will also want 1 gallon of water, and the water matters more than you would ever guess. If you are on city water, it has chlorine in it, and chlorine is designed to kill microbes, which is the precise opposite of what you are trying to do here. So fill your watering can and let it sit out, uncovered, overnight. Most of that chlorine will simply drift off into the air by morning. And if you happen to collect rainwater, that is better still. Because molasses is so thick and stubborn, it will not dissolve in cold water. So pour just a little warm water into your container first, add your tablespoon of molasses, and stir until it is fully dissolved with no sticky lump left at the bottom. Then top the rest off with cool water to make your full gallon. And that is it. Your $1 batch is ready to go. Now, how you put it down is where everything is won or lost. Pour it onto the soil, right around the base of the plant, soaking the root zone underneath. Do not spray it on the leaves. I want to be very clear about that one, because spraying sugar water across your foliage invites ants, draws in other insects, and can leave a sticky film that grows a black, sooty mold. This is a drink for the soil, not a spray for the leaves. 1 gallon will comfortably treat somewhere between 12 and 20 mature plants. For little seedlings or your houseplants, go gentler. About a teaspoon of molasses to a quart of water. And here is the step that almost nobody bothers to tell you. The one step that decides whether any of this works at all. Before you pour, make sure there is wood under your kindling. In plain terms, feed your soil first. If your beds already have compost worked into them, or a layer of mulch breaking down on top, or you are pouring around established plants with living roots, then good, you have got your logs in place. But if your soil is bare, packed hard, and lifeless, spread an inch of compost over it and water that in first. Only then bring out the molasses, kindling on wood, every single time. As for timing, less really is more with this one. Use it just once every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season, and no more often than that. The microbes need a little time to settle between feedings, and hammering the soil with sugar over and over only throws it right back into that boom and crash cycle. Water it in during the early morning or in the cool of the evening, never in the heat of midday, and follow it with a little plain water to carry the molasses down toward the roots. So what should you honestly expect to see? Within a few days, the soil around your plants will look a shade darker and feel a little more alive, and you may start spotting earthworms working up closer to the surface, which is always a wonderful sign. Over the following weeks, in healthy soil, you can expect steadier, greener growth and stronger, more settled plants. What you should not expect is for your tomatoes to triple in size inside of a week. You will see that promise plastered all over the internet, stuck to this very trick. So let me tell you plainly what triples and what does not. Your plants do not triple. What can multiply quickly for a little while is the population of microscopic life inside the soil you just fed. That surge is absolutely real. The fairy tale built on top of it is not. And in the end, the real thing, a living soil that quietly feeds your plants season after season, is worth far more than any fairy tale ever could be. One last option, for those of you who like to tinker. Some gardeners add a teaspoon of ordinary baker's yeast to the gallon alongside the molasses. The yeast brings another set of microbes into the mix, and it does produce small amounts of natural plant growth compounds. It is a perfectly fine thing to try, and it can give your brew a little extra life. Just keep your expectations on the ground. It is a gentle boost, not a magic potion. And whatever you end up mixing, use it within a day, because the microbes will start eating that sugar right there in your watering can, and the batch loses its punch by the next morning. Section 6, where it fits plus the economic logic line. So who is this trick really for? If you garden in raised beds with good compost, in containers on a patio, or you are slowly nursing tired old soil back to life, then molasses is a quiet, cheap, genuinely useful helper to keep in your kit. It is never going to be the star of the show. It is a supporting player. But it is a good one. And you might be wondering, if this is so well understood by university scientists, why on earth have you never once seen it on a store shelf or in a commercial? The answer is not some grand conspiracy. It is just plain economics. Molasses is a leftover of making sugar, produced by the millions of gallons, and it sells for a few dollars a bottle. No company can patent it, slap a brand on it, or build a tidy business reselling it to you every spring. There is simply no money in telling you about $1 worth of syrup. So nobody pays to run the ad. That is the whole reason, and it is a quiet little lesson in why the best tools in gardening are so often the ones nobody is shouting about. When you stop trying so hard to feed the plant and you start trying to feed the life underneath it, something quietly settles in you as a gardener. You begin to work alongside the soil instead of fighting against it, and the garden, in its own slow and patient way, begins to work alongside you. That, far more than any single spoonful of syrup, is the real harvest. So the next time you walk past that dusty bottle of Blackstrap molasses in the baking aisle, you will know exactly what it is and exactly what it is not. Go ahead and pick it up. Feed your soil, not your plants, and feed it wisely. If this gave you a brand new way of seeing the ground under your feet, share it with a gardening friend who would love it too. Leave a comment and tell me what you are growing this year. And subscribe so we can keep digging up the real stories together. Until next time, take good care of your soil, and it will take good care of you.